The morning light filtered through the grimy windows of Jim's diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Boston in autumn had a particular quality to it, a crispness that carried both promise and melancholy. Robert Mitchell felt it in his bones as he guided his daughter Sarah through the diner's door, the small bell announcing their arrival with a cheerful jingle that belied the heaviness in his shoulders. "Over there, sweetheart," Robert said, gesturing to their usual booth in the corner. At 45, his face carried the weathered lines of a man who had seen more than his share of hardship, but his eyes remained clear and focused, especially when they fell on his 8-year-old daughter. Sarah slid into the booth, her backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. Her dark curls bounced as she settled in, her eyes so much like her mother's, darting around the diner with endless curiosity. "Can I have pancakes today, Dad? With extra syrup?" Robert's face softened. "It's Tuesday, kiddo. You know the deal. Pancakes are for weekends." He paused, seeing the slight fall in her expression. "But I suppose we could make an exception. Just this once." 3 years had passed since cancer had taken his wife Emily. 3 years of raising Sarah alone, of working 14-hour days at his mechanic shop, of falling asleep in a bed that still felt too empty on one side. 3 years of learning how to say yes to pancakes on a Tuesday, because sometimes small joys were all they had. The waitress Doris, who had been serving at Jim's since Robert was a boy, approached with a coffee pot in hand. "The usual, Rob. Please." His calloused hands wrapped around the ceramic mug as she poured. "And pancakes for the little lady. Extra syrup." Doris winked at Sarah. "Coming right up, sunshine." The diner hummed with the familiar morning symphony, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, the murmur of construction workers plotting their day over eggs and toast, the clinking of silverware against plates. This was Robert's world, simple, predictable, honest. A world away from the chaos he'd known during his 10 years with the Marines, from the sand and blood of Iraq and Afghanistan, from the nightmares that still occasionally woke him in cold sweats. Sarah pulled out her math homework, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Dad, can you help me with fractions again? Mrs. Peterson says I need to practice more." Robert leaned forward, his massive frame, still muscular from years of military discipline and physical labor, somehow gentle, as he explained how 3/4 and 6/8 were the same values, just written differently. His patience was infinite with her, even when it had long run out for the rest of the world. The bell above the door jingled again, and Robert's instincts, dulled but never eliminated, made him glance up. Officer Diana Morris entered, her uniform pressed to perfection, her posture rigid as steel. At 38, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had clawed her way up through the ranks. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes scanning the diner with professional detachment. Robert returned to Sarah's homework, but he felt Diana's gaze land on him. Something in her expression hardened, a recognition flickering across her face. "Daddy, I think I get it now," Sarah said proudly, showing him her work. "That's my girl." Robert smiled, his voice a low rumble of pride. "Smart as they come." Diana approached their table, her boots clicking against the floor with military precision. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice cool. "Fancy seeing you here." Robert looked up, his face neutral. "Officer Morris." "You still haven't paid that parking ticket from last month," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "City doesn't run on IOUs, you know." "I mailed the check last week," Robert replied evenly. "Should be processed by now." Diana's eyes narrowed, then drifted to Sarah's homework spread across the table. "Doing school at a diner? Interesting parenting choice." The diner had gone quiet. Even the cook had stopped the rhythmic scraping of his spatula against the grill. Sarah shrank in her seat, her earlier confidence evaporating under the officer's scrutiny. "We're just having breakfast," Robert said, his voice still calm, though a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Sarah's an early riser. Likes to get a head start." Diana scoffed. "Sure, bet you're teaching her all sorts of valuable lessons, like how to dress like you just crawled out from under a car." Her eyes flicked dismissively over Robert's work clothes, clean but worn with faint oil stains that never quite washed out. The silence in the diner grew heavier. Robert could feel the eyes of the other patrons, the judgment, the anticipation of conflict. But more importantly, he could feel Sarah's small hand clutch his arm, trembling slightly. Slowly, deliberately, Robert stood. At 6'2", he towered over Diana, his broad shoulders blocking the morning light. But he didn't step toward her, didn't raise his voice, didn't do any of the things his younger self might have done. "My daughter is watching," he said quietly, his voice barely audible to the other diners. "So I'm going to thank you for your service to our community, pay for our breakfast, and leave. But not because you intimidate me, Officer Morris, because I want my daughter to see that real strength isn't about having the last word." Diana blinked momentarily, thrown by his composure. Robert placed $30 on the table, far more than their breakfast cost, and gathered Sarah's homework. "Come on, sweetheart. We'll finish this at the shop." Sarah slid out of the booth, her small hand finding his. As they walked past, Diana Robert paused. "And that parking ticket was for stopping to help an elderly woman who'd fallen on the sidewalk. I explained that to your colleague who wrote it, but I paid it anyway because that's what responsible citizens do." The bell jingled as they left, the sound somehow final, like the period at the end of a sentence. Outside, the autumn air was crisp against their faces. Sarah looked up at her father, her eyes wide. "Why was she so mean to you, Daddy?" Robert crouched down to her level, his knees protesting after years of carrying too much weight, both physical and emotional. "Some people, sweetheart, are fighting battles we know nothing about. Maybe she's had a rough morning. Maybe she's dealt with too many people who don't respect her badge. Or maybe she's just forgotten that the uniform is about serving people, not scaring them. But she made you feel bad." "No," Robert shook his head. "She tried to. There's a difference." He tucked a strand of hair behind Sarah's ear. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Your mom used to say that, remember?" Sarah nodded solemnly. "I remember." "Good girl. Now let's get to the shop. Mr. Hendricks is bringing in that '67 Mustang today, and I promised you could help me check the carburetor." They walked hand in hand down the street, past the red brick buildings that had stood for generations, past neighbors who nodded in greeting, past the world that Robert had built for them, brick by careful brick, after losing the foundation they'd once stood on. Behind them in the diner, Diana Morris watched through the window, her coffee growing cold in her hands, something unreadable passing across her face. Robert's shop, Mitchell's Mechanics, sat at the corner of Maple and 4th, a brick building with large garage doors that had once been part of a textile factory during Boston's industrial heyday. The sign above the entrance was hand-painted not by a professional, but by Robert and Sarah one Sunday afternoon shortly after Emily's funeral. The S in Mitchell's was slightly crooked, and the bottom of the C in Mechanics curved a bit too much, but Robert had refused to fix it. "It's perfect," he'd told Sarah when she'd noticed the imperfections. "Because it's ours." The interior of the shop smelled of motor oil metal and the faint scent of the pine air freshener that Robert hung near his workbench in a futile attempt to combat the more industrial odors. Tools lined the walls in meticulous order wrenches arranged by size screwdrivers, sorted by type specialized instruments for specific jobs, all within easy reach. It was a system born from military precision and years of practical experience. "All right, mathematician," Robert said as he unlocked the front door. "How about you set up at your station while I get the coffee going? Mr. Hendricks won't be here for another hour." Sarah's station was a small desk in the corner of the office area, equipped with colored pencils, books, and a small radio that played only classic rock stations, the soundtrack of Robert's youth, and now, by default, Sarah's as well. The walls around her desk were covered with her drawings, fantastical creatures, detailed machines inspired by her father's work, and countless portraits of a woman whose face Sarah struggled to remember but refused to forget. As Robert prepared the ancient coffee maker, a relic from the 1980s that he'd rebuilt 3 times, he glanced at his daughter through the office window. She was already absorbed in her math homework, her tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration, just like Emily used to do when she was focused on something. The familiar pang hit him as it always did, not as sharp as it once was, but present nonetheless. A ghost pain from a limb long amputated. The bell above the shop door jingled, pulling Robert from his thoughts. He stepped out of the small kitchenette to find Frank Henderson, an elderly man who had been coming to Robert's shop since before it was Robert's. "Morning, son," Frank said, removing his Red Sox cap. At 82, Frank moved slower than he once had, but his mind remained razor sharp, particularly when it came to engines. "Thought I'd stop by before you get busy." "Always got time for you, Frank," Robert replied, pouring a cup of coffee and handing it to the old man. "What's on your mind?" Frank settled into the chair by the counter, his weathered hands wrapping around the mug. "Heard about what happened at Jim's this morning." News traveled fast in their neighborhood. Robert shrugged. It was nothing. Didn't sound like nothing. Doris said you handled yourself like a gentleman even when that officer was trying to get a rise out of you. Sarah was there, Robert said simply, as if that explained everything. And to Frank, it did. The old man nodded. That Morris woman's got a chip on her shoulder the size of Massachusetts. Been that way since her brother got killed. Robert paused in the middle of wiping down the counter. I didn't know she had a brother. Mark Morris, good kid. Used to be a mechanic too after he got out of the army. Shot trying to stop a robbery at the convenience store on 10th Street about 5 years back. Frank sipped his coffee. Looked a bit like you, come to think of it. Same build, same way of carrying himself. Robert absorbed this information silently. It didn't excuse Diana's behavior, but it provided context, a glimpse into the battle she might be fighting. The conversation shifted to Frank's arthritis and the upcoming Red Sox season, but Robert's mind kept returning to Diana Morris and her lost brother. By the time Frank left and Mr. Hendricks arrived with his Mustang, Robert had tucked the information away, not forgotten but filed for future reference. The day proceeded with its familiar rhythm. Robert worked on the Mustang's engine, occasionally calling Sarah over to explain a particular component or process. His large hands capable of dismantling an M16 in under a minute or bending metal with sheer force moved with surprising delicacy among the car's inner workings. See this? He pointed to the carburetor. This mixes the air and fuel before it goes into the engine, kind of like how you mix chocolate syrup into milk. Sarah nodded seriously. So if it's broken, the car gets sick. That's right, Robert smiled. And our job is to be the doctors who make it better. Around noon, as Robert was elbow deep in the Mustang's engine and Sarah was enjoying her lunch on her station, the familiar sound of sirens pierced the air. Not unusual in their part of Boston, but something about the urgency of the sound made Robert straighten up, wiping his hands on a rag as he moved toward the garage doors. The screech of tires came next, followed by the sickening crunch of metal against metal. The collision happened just beyond the intersection, visible from Robert's shop, a police cruiser T-boned by a black SUV that had run the red light. Sarah, stay inside, Robert called over his shoulder, already moving. Lock the office door and don't come out until I come get you. He didn't wait for a response, trusting his daughter to follow instructions as he'd taught her. The scene that greeted him as he ran toward the intersection sent ice through his veins. The police cruiser was crushed against a light pole, its driver's side door caved in. The SUV had spun halfway around its front end, crumpled steam rising from under the hood. But it was the movement from within the SUV that triggered Robert's combat instincts, the too quick, too purposeful shifting of multiple occupants. This wasn't an accident. It was an ambush. Robert's pace quickened as he saw the driver's door of the police cruiser open slightly. A hand emerged weakly, pushing at the door, which was jammed against the pole. Through the shattered window, Robert caught a glimpse of Officer Diana Morris, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead, her eyes dazed. Time slowed as the passenger door of the SUV burst open. A man emerged, weapon already in hand, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. He raised the gun toward the police cruiser. Robert didn't think he reacted. 15 years might have passed since his last combat deployment, but his body remembered. He grabbed a trash can lid from the curb and flung it like a discus, his aim true. It struck the gunman's arm just as he fired, sending the shot wide. The sound of the gunshot shattered the strange bubble of slow motion. People screamed, car doors slammed as drivers abandoned their vehicles. And Robert kept moving. He barreled into the first gunman with the full force of his 220-pound frame, driving him back against the SUV. The gun clattered to the pavement. But there was a second man. There was always a second man emerging from the back seat, weapon already drawn. Robert dropped low, sweeping the legs out from under the first assailant, using the momentary advantage to lunge toward the fallen weapon. His fingers closed around the grip just as the second shooter took aim. The bullet caught Robert in the side, a line of fire that burned through flesh and muscle. But Marines are trained to function through pain to complete the mission, regardless of personal cost. And Robert's mission was clear: protect. He raised the weapon and fired a single shot, not at the gunman, but at the SUV's gas tank. The resulting explosion wasn't massive like in the movies, but it was enough to create chaos, enough to buy time. He scrambled toward the police cruiser, putting himself between Diana and the attackers. "Stay down," he hissed at her through the window. "Help is coming." Diana's eyes focused on him, recognition dawning through the haze of what was likely a concussion. Her mouth opened, but whatever she meant to say was drowned out by another shot from the second gunman who had taken cover behind a parked car. Robert felt the impact more than he heard it, a second bullet finding its mark in his shoulder. The pain was distant, academic almost. Shock, he knew. It would hurt later if there was a later. A flash of movement caught his peripheral vision, the first gunman recovering, reaching for something in his jacket. Robert didn't hesitate. He fired again and the man fell. Inside the cruiser, Diana had managed to draw her service weapon. Through the shattered window, she took aim and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The second gunman dropped. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Backup arriving, Robert felt the adrenaline beginning to ebb, the pain starting to register in waves. He leaned heavily against the cruiser, his breath coming in short gasps. "Mitchell," Diana's voice reached him, strained but clear. "Why?" Robert turned to look at her, his vision starting to blur at the edges. "Because my daughter was watching," he managed, though he knew Sarah couldn't see them from the shop. "And because it was the right thing to do." He slid down against the cruiser door, leaving a smear of blood on the white paint. The world was starting to tilt, colors bleeding into each other. The sirens were very close now, but they sounded far away, as if coming from underwater. Diana was saying something else, her voice urgent, but Robert couldn't make out the words. As consciousness began to slip away, his thoughts turned to Sarah waiting in the locked office. Sarah, who had already lost one parent. Sarah, who drew pictures of her mother to keep her memory alive. "Tell her," Robert whispered, though he wasn't sure if Diana could hear him. "Tell her I didn't hesitate." Then darkness claimed him, and the last thing he was aware of was the sensation of falling into a void that felt like the desert night sky over Baghdad, endless and consuming. The steady beep of a heart monitor pulled Robert back to consciousness, each electronic pulse tethering him to the world of the living. His eyelids felt impossibly heavy, as if weighted with lead, but he forced them open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital room. White ceiling, white walls, the antiseptic smell that all hospitals share regardless of location or quality. For a disorienting moment, he thought he was back in the military hospital in Germany, recovering from the IED that had nearly taken his leg during his second tour. But then he heard it, a small, familiar voice reading aloud from what sounded like a children's book. Sarah. His Sarah was here, which meant he wasn't in Germany. He was in Boston. He was home. Robert turned his head, slightly wincing at the pain that radiated from his shoulder and side. Sarah sat in a chair pulled close to his bed, her dark curls falling forward as she read from a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web. She hadn't noticed that he was awake. "Some pig," she read seriously, her finger tracing the words. "Terrific, radiant, humble." "That's a good book," Robert said, his voice a raspy whisper. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes widening. "Daddy." The book tumbled forgotten to the floor as she leapt from her chair. She didn't throw herself at him. She was too careful, too aware of his injuries for that, but her hands gripped the edge of his bed with white-knuckled intensity. "You're awake. The doctor said you might sleep for days." Robert managed a small smile. "Can't sleep too long. Who'd help you with your fractions?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. So much like her mother, determined not to show weakness, even when her heart was breaking. "Mrs. Wilson from next door has been helping me. She's not as good as you, though." "I bet." Robert's gaze shifted beyond Sarah to where an older woman first Mrs. Wilson presumably stood near the door, her face lined with concern and relief. "Thank you," he mouthed to her. Mrs. Wilson nodded. "I'll get the nurse," she said quietly, slipping out of the room. "Are you going to be okay, Daddy?" Sarah's voice was small, uncertain in a way that made Robert's chest ache more than his wounds. "I'm going to be just fine, sweetheart," he assured her, reaching out with his uninjured arm to take her hand. "Just got a little banged up, that's all." "They said you got shot, twice." Her lower lip trembled. "Like the soldiers in your old pictures." Robert squeezed her hand gently. "That's right, but I'm tougher than I look, remember, and doctors these days can fix just about anything." Sarah seemed to consider this, her young face solemn. "Mrs. Wilson said you saved a police officer, the one who was mean to us at the diner." Before Robert could respond, the door opened again, and a doctor entered, followed by a nurse and Mrs. Wilson. The next several minutes were consumed with medical checks. Questions about pain levels and explanations of injuries that Robert only half listened to. He already knew the score gunshot wound to the right side through and through, no major organs damaged. Another to the left shoulder, more complicated, some tissue damage, but the bone intact. He'd been lucky. Again. When the medical staff finally left, promising to return with pain medication, Mrs. Wilson approached the bed. "Sarah's been staying with me," she explained. "I hope that's all right. The social worker thought it would be better than foster care since she knows me." "More than all right," Robert said gratefully. "I can't thank you enough." "Don't mention it. She's a good girl." Mrs. Wilson patted Sarah's head affectionately. "Smart as a whip, too. Now I'll give you two some time, but then this young lady needs dinner and a good night's sleep. She's barely left your side for 2 days." 2 days. Robert had lost 2 days. He watched Mrs. Wilson leave, then turned back to Sarah, who had reclaimed her chair beside his bed. "Have you been reading to me this whole time?" Sarah nodded. "Mrs. Wilson said that sometimes people can hear things even when they're asleep. So I read all of Stuart Little, and I'm halfway through Charlotte's Web." Robert's throat tightened. "That was very thoughtful of you." "I didn't want you to be alone," she said simply, "like how you never leave me alone when I'm sick." The innocent observation struck Robert with unexpected force. Since Emily's death, he'd structured his entire life around ensuring that Sarah never felt abandoned, working from home when she had the flu, attending every school event, no matter how minor, being both mother and father to a child who deserves so much more than a broken man could give. "I'll always come back to you, Sarah," he promised, the words thick in his throat. "Always." She smiled, then a real smile that reached her eyes. "I know, Daddy. You're a hero." Robert shook his head slightly. "No, I'm just your dad. That's enough for me." The door opened again, but it wasn't the nurse or doctor returning. It was Officer Diana Morris, out of uniform, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse. Her hair was down, softening her usually severe features, and there was a bandage at her temple where her head had struck the window during the crash. She hesitated in the doorway, her eyes meeting Robert's, over Sarah's head. Something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement, a shift in the invisible balance that had defined their brief interactions. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice lacking its usual edge. "I'm glad to see you're awake." Sarah turned in her chair, her expression guarded as she recognized the woman from the diner. Robert gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Officer Morris," he greeted her. "You're looking better than the last time I saw you." A ghost of a smile touched Diana's lips. "Better than you in any case." She stepped further into the room, her movements careful as if she were approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Sarah, right? I wonder if you might do me a favor. I think I saw a vending machine down the hall with some chocolate bars. There's a $5 bill in my pocket if you'd like to get something for yourself and your dad." Sarah looked to Robert, who nodded slightly. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just don't go any further than the vending machine, all right?" After Sarah had left, clutching the $5 bill, Diana moved closer to the bed. Up close, Robert could see the shadows under her eyes, the strain in her face that spoke of sleepless nights. "The doctors say you'll make a full recovery," she said, "though the shoulder might give you trouble in cold weather." "Wouldn't be the first scar to act up when it rains," Robert replied. "What about the men who attacked us, dead? Both of them?" Diana's jaw tightened. "They were members of the Skull Ravens, a drug gang we've been investigating for months. They've been pushing a new synthetic into schools, and I was getting too close to their supplier." Robert absorbed this information with a nod. "So it wasn't random?" "No, it was a hit, plain and simple." Diana's hands clenched at her sides. "You saved my life, Mitchell, after I treated you like dirt." "You were doing your Robert said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Diana's eyes flashed. Don't make excuses for me. What I did at that diner was unprofessional and cruel. And then you took 2 bullets for me." She shook her head as if she still couldn't quite believe it. "Why would you do that?" Robert was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. The easy response would be to say it was instinct, training, the automatic reaction of a former Marine. But that wasn't the whole truth. "I saw your brother in you," he said finally. "When you walked into that diner, that chip on your shoulder, the way you carried yourself, like you were bracing for a hit that might come from any direction. I've seen it before in guys who've lost someone, who are angry at the world for taking something they can't get back. Diana went very still. How do you know about my brother? Small neighborhood. People talk. Robert shifted slightly, wincing as pain shot through his side. I'm sorry about what happened to him. He must have been brave. He was an idiot, Diana said. But there was no heat in the words, only an old familiar grief. He should have just given them the money. Instead, he tried to be a hero. He tried to do what he thought was right, Robert corrected gently. Same as you do every day when you put on that badge. Diana looked away, blinking rapidly. I've been on administrative leave since the shooting. Mandatory after an incident like this, but my captain wants to see you when you're up for it. Said something about a civilian commendation. Robert shook his head. I don't need recognition for doing what anyone would have done. That's just it. Diana met his gaze again. Not anyone would have done what you did. Most people would have run the other way, but you ran toward the danger. You protected me even after I humiliated you in front of your daughter. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't understand people like you and Mark. Never have. Before Robert could respond, Sarah returned clutching a chocolate bar and a can of soda. She approached cautiously, her eyes darting between her father and Diana. I got you a Snickers, Dad, she said. And Officer Morris, I got your change. She held out $1 and some coins. Diana crouched down to Sarah's level, something she hadn't done at the diner. Thank you, Sarah. That was very responsible of you. But why don't you keep it? Maybe you can put it in your piggy bank. Sarah considered this, then nodded solemnly. Okay, Dad says it's important to save for a rainy day. Your dad sounds like a smart man, Diana said, her eyes flicking up to meet Robert's. You're lucky to have him. I know, Sarah replied with the simple certainty of a child who has never questioned that she is loved. He's the best dad in the world. Diana straightened up. I should go. Let you rest. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at Robert. Thank you, she said quietly, for my life. After she had gone, Sarah climbed carefully onto the edge of Robert's bed, mindful of his injuries. Is she still mad at us, Daddy? Robert smoothed a hand over his daughter's curls. No, sweetheart, I don't think she was ever really mad at us. Sometimes people are just mad at the world and we happen to be in the way. Sarah nodded as if this made perfect sense. Like when Tommy Jenkins pushed me on the playground last week because his dog died. Something like that, Robert agreed. Now, how about you read me some more of Charlotte and that pig? I want to hear what happens next. As Sarah retrieved her book from the floor and settled back into her chair, Robert gazed out the window at the Boston skyline. The sky was turning the deep indigo of early evening streetlights, beginning to flicker on one by one. Somewhere out there, Diana Morris was driving home carrying the weight of her brother's death, and now the additional burden of owing her life to a man she had misjudged. Robert knew something about carrying weights, about the way they could bend your shoulders and change your stride if you let them, about how the only way to bear them was to acknowledge them, to make them part of your journey rather than obstacles in your path. His side throbbed with a deep, insistent pain. His shoulder felt as if it were on fire. But Sarah's voice reading about a spider who saved a pig anchored him to this moment, to this life he had built from the ashes of what had been lost. And for now, that was enough. The physical therapy room at Boston General Hospital smelled of antiseptic and determination. 3 weeks after the shooting, Robert Mitchell gripped the parallel bars, his jaw clenched as sweat beaded on his forehead. The effort to walk 10 simple steps shouldn't have been this monumental, but his body, once capable of carrying a 100-pound pack through desert heat, now trembled with the strain of supporting its own weight. That's it, Mr. Mitchell, encouraged Lisa, his therapist. 5 more steps. You're doing great. Robert didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that breath was precious during pain. Wasting it on words was foolish. His left shoulder throbbed where the bullet had torn through muscle and tissue, and his right side burned with each movement. But he kept going one excruciating step after another, because Sarah was watching. She sat in a chair against the wall, her legs swinging, a sketchbook open on her lap. She wasn't drawing, though. Her eyes were fixed on her father, wide and solemn, tracking his progress with an intensity that belied her 8 years. Robert reached the end of the bars, his breathing ragged. Lisa beamed at him. Excellent. That's a 30% improvement from yesterday. Doesn't feel like 30%, Robert muttered, lowering himself carefully into the wheelchair that waited at the end of the bars. Healing isn't linear, Mr. Mitchell, Lisa replied, checking his pulse. Some days you'll feel like you're standing still. Some days you'll take leaps forward. The important thing is you keep showing up. Robert nodded, too exhausted to argue. His gaze found Sarah, who had abandoned her pretense of drawing and was now rushing toward him, her face split by a grin. "You did it, Dad," she exclaimed, stopping just short of throwing herself into his arms at a restraint that hurt more than his wounds. Before the shooting, Sarah had been free with her affection, climbing into his lap without warning, wrapping her arms around his neck when he least expected it. Now she approached him like he was made of glass, afraid that her touch might shatter him. "Sure did, kiddo," he managed to smile. "How about we celebrate with some ice cream in the cafeteria?" Sarah's face lit up, but she glanced at Lisa for confirmation. The therapist nodded. "Ice cream sounds perfect. Just don't overdo it, Mr. Mitchell. Remember small victories." As Lisa wheeled him toward the elevator, Sarah, walking alongside Robert, tried to focus on the victory rather than the indignity. 3 weeks ago, he'd been at the peak of his physical capabilities, running a business, raising a daughter, carrying the weight of his world on his shoulders. Now he couldn't even make it to the bathroom without assistance. The elevator doors opened, revealing Officer Diana Morris. She'd visited twice since that first day, when Robert had regained consciousness, brief, somewhat awkward visits, where neither of them quite knew what to say. The dynamic between them had shifted so dramatically that they were still finding their footing like dancers learning a new rhythm. "Officer Morris," Sarah's face brightened with recognition. The wariness she'd initially shown toward Diana had melted during those visits, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Diana stepped aside to let them enter the elevator. She wasn't in uniform today, dressed instead in jeans and a simple button-down shirt that softened her usual severity. "Hey there, Sarah. Mr. Mitchell." Her eyes took in the wheelchair, the sweat still glistening on Robert's brow, the slight tremor in his hands. "Physical therapy day, huh?" "Every day is physical therapy day," Robert replied, not bothering to hide the exhaustion in his voice. Diana, of all people, wouldn't expect him to pretend. "We're getting ice cream," Sarah informed her, "to celebrate Dad walking all the way to the end of the bars." Something flickered across Diana's face, recognition, perhaps, of the monumental effort hidden behind such a simple achievement. "That sounds like it's worth celebrating. Mind if I join you?" Lisa, sensing the shift in the air, handed the wheelchair controls to Diana. "I'll let you take it from here, Officer Morris. Mr. Mitchell, remember what we talked about, rest between exertions." As the elevator descended, Sarah filled the silence with chatter about her school day. Mrs. Wilson had been taking her to and from school, maintaining as much normalcy as possible while Robert recovered. "And Tommy Jenkins said his dad could fix cars better than you. But I told him that was impossible because you're the best mechanic in Boston. And then he tried to say that wasn't true, but Jenny Martinez said her mom brings their car to you and you fixed it when nobody else could, so Tommy shut up after that." Robert smiled at his daughter's fierce loyalty. "Tommy's dad works at the Chevrolet dealership, sweetheart. He's a fine mechanic." "But not as good as you," Sarah insisted, her faith absolute. The cafeteria was relatively quiet at this hour, the lunch rush having ended and the dinner crowd not yet arrived. Diana guided Robert's wheelchair to a table by the window, then went to get ice cream for all of them. Sarah climbed into a chair next to her father, pulling out her sketchbook again. "What are you drawing today?" Robert asked, grateful for the chance to shift focus away from his limitations. Sarah tilted the book so he could see a surprisingly detailed rendering of a mechanical heart, gears and pistons where chambers should be. "It's for you," she explained. "Mrs. Peterson said the heart is like an engine for the body. So I thought maybe if your heart was made of metal, it wouldn't get hurt so easy." Robert's throat tightened. "That's beautiful, Sarah. But you know, even the strongest engines need maintenance sometimes." "That's what I'm here for," she replied with the simple confidence of a child. "I'll help fix you." Diana returned with 3 bowls of ice cream chocolate for Sarah, vanilla for Robert, and something with swirls of caramel for herself. She placed them on the table and took a seat across from Robert. "Thank you," he said, meaning more than just the ice cream. Diana nodded, understanding the unspoken. "How's the recovery coming?" "Really?" Robert glanced at Sarah, who was already absorbed in her ice cream, adding careful annotations to her mechanical heart drawing between bites. "Slower than I'd like," he admitted quietly. "The doctors say I can go home next week, but I won't be back to full capacity for months. Maybe never with the shoulder." Diana absorbed this with a frown. "What about the shop? Closed for now. I've got some savings enough to cover the mortgage for a couple months. After that," He shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at his healing wounds. I'll figure something out. Always do. The guys at the precinct have been asking about you, Diana said, changing the subject. Word got around about what happened. You've got quite a fan club forming. Robert huffed a short laugh. Not looking for fans. No, you wouldn't be. Diana's expression turned serious. Captain Reynolds wants to meet you. He's mentioned something about a civilian liaison position helping build better relationships between the department and the community. I'm a mechanic, Officer Morris, not a politician or a social worker. Diana, she corrected, and you're more than a mechanic. You're someone who ran toward danger instead of away from it. Someone who saved an officer's life despite having every reason to walk away. She leaned forward slightly. Those bullet wounds aren't the only scars you carry, are they? Robert's gaze sharpened. You've been looking into my background. Standard procedure when a civilian gets involved in a police incident, Diana replied, not apologizing. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, honorable discharge in 2013. She paused. You never mention any of that. It's not relevant to fixing carburetors. Maybe not, but it's relevant to who you are. Diana's voice softened. And to why you did what you did that day. Robert was saved from responding by Sarah, who had finished her ice cream and was now tugging at his sleeve. Dad, can I go look at the fish tank, please? It's right there. She pointed to a small aquarium near the cafeteria entrance, visible from their table. All right, but stay where I can see you, Robert agreed. As Sarah bounded off, Diana watched her go with a smile. She's a remarkable kid. She's had to grow up too fast. Robert said, his eyes tracking his daughter's movements. First losing her mother, now this. It's not fair to her. Life rarely is, Diana replied. But she has you. That counts for a lot. Robert turned back to Diana, studying her with the same careful attention he might give a complex engine problem. Why are you here, Diana? Really? She didn't pretend to misunderstand. Because I owe you a debt I can never repay. Because every time I close my eyes, I see you sliding down the side of my cruiser, bleeding out because of bullets meant for me. She took a deep breath. And because you remind me of my brother in ways that terrify me. The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way their previous interactions hadn't been. Tell me about him, Robert said quietly. Your brother. Diana's fingers traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass. Mark was 4 years younger than me. Always the golden boy, charming, athletic, everyone's favorite. Joined the Army right out of high school, served 6 years, including a tour in Afghanistan. The corner of her mouth lifted in a sad smile. He was good at it, you know, the discipline, the brotherhood, the purpose. But then he came home and it was like he couldn't quite find his footing in civilian life. Robert nodded, familiar with the disorientation. It happens to a lot of us. He tried college for a while, but it didn't stick. Eventually, he found work as a mechanic. He'd always been good with his hands, could fix anything with an engine. For a couple years, things seemed okay. He had an apartment, a girlfriend, a job he didn't hate. Diana's expression darkened. Then the girlfriend left, said he had issues she couldn't handle. Mark started drinking, missing work. One night he stopped at a convenience store on his way home. She fell silent. Robert didn't press, knowing she needed to tell the story at her own pace. 2 guys came in waving guns, demanding money. Diana finally continued. The security footage showed everything. The clerk was handing over the cash when Mark stepped forward. He didn't have a weapon, didn't say anything threatening. He just stepped forward. One of the robbers panicked and fired, hit Mark in the chest. Her voice had gone flat, clinical, the way people sound when they're holding emotion at bay through sheer force of will. He bled out before the ambulance arrived. I'm sorry, Robert said, the words inadequate but sincere. Diana nodded, acknowledging his sympathy. The thing is, when I saw you in that diner with Sarah, something in me just snapped. You looked so much like him, the way you sat, the way you listened to your daughter, even the grease under your fingernails. She let out a shaky breath. And I was suddenly so angry. At Mark for throwing his life away. At myself for not seeing the signs. At you for being alive when he wasn't. Grief does that, Robert said. Turns itself into anger because anger feels more actionable than sadness. Diana looked up, meeting his gaze directly. How do you know that? Because I wanted to burn the world down after Emily died, he admitted. Cancer. 3 years ago, she fought for 18 months, but in the end, he shook his head slightly. For a while, I was just going through the motions, breathing because my body insisted on it, not because I had any real desire to keep living. What changed? Robert's eyes found Sarah still entranced by the tropical fish swimming in lazy circles. She did. One night, about 2 months after the funeral, I found her sitting on our front porch in her pajamas staring at the stars. When I asked what she was doing, she said, "Mommy told me she'd be in the stars, so I'm looking for her." And I realized that if I checked out even emotionally, she'd be an orphan. Not technically, but in all the ways that matter. Diana absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. "So you chose to live for her?" "I chose to live," Robert corrected. "Sarah was the reason, but the choice was for myself too. To honor what Emily and I had built, to be the man she believed I could be." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that exists between people who have glimpsed each other's true selves and found no reason to look away. "Captain Reynolds is a good man," Diana said, finally returning to their earlier conversation. "The job offer is legitimate, and it comes with health insurance. Maybe consider meeting with him at least." Robert sighed, watching as Sarah pressed her fingertip against the glass, tracking a particularly bright blue fish. "I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking." Diana stood gathering the empty ice cream bowls. "I should get going. My first shift back is tomorrow morning." "They cleared you for duty?" Robert asked. "Limited duty desk work for now, but it's a start." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. The men who attacked us, they weren't just random gang members. They were sent specifically to take me out because I'm getting close to identifying their supplier. This case, it's bigger than we initially thought." Robert absorbed this information with a nod. "Be careful then." "Always am," Diana smiled slightly. "Rest up, Mitchell. Boston needs men like you back on their feet." As she walked away, Sarah returned to the table, climbing back into her chair. "Is Officer Diana your friend now, Dad?" Robert considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think she might be, yeah." Sarah nodded, satisfied. "Good. I like her better when she's not being mean." "Me too, kiddo," Robert agreed, ruffling her hair gently. "Me too." The autumn light filtered through the blinds of Captain James Harper's office at the Boston Police Department's Precinct 14, casting alternating bands of shadow and warmth across the cluttered desk. At 55, Harper had the weathered look of a man who had seen the best and worst humanity had to offer and had made his peace with both. His salt and pepper hair was cropped close to his scalp, a habit from his days in the Gulf War that he'd never abandoned, and the creases around his eyes deepened when he smiled, which he was doing now as he extended his hand to Robert. "Mr. Mitchell, it's good to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about your actions last month." Robert shook the offered hand, hiding his discomfort at being in the precinct. Even after all these years, institutions of authority still made him uneasy, a lingering effect of too many military debriefings where he'd had to justify split-second decisions made under fire. "Captain Harper, thank you for seeing me." Robert settled into the chair across from the desk, trying not to wince as his still-healing wounds protested. "How's the recovery coming along?" Harper asked, gesturing to Robert's shoulder. "Getting there. Doctor says another month before I can lift anything heavier than a coffee mug with this arm." Robert didn't mention the nightmares that had returned, the cold sweats, the moments when a car backfiring sent him reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Some struggles weren't meant for sharing with strangers. Harper nodded, understanding more than Robert had voiced. "I took a round to the leg in '91. Spent 6 months learning how to walk again. The body remembers, but it also adapts." There was an unexpected comfort in the captain's matter-of-fact acknowledgement. No pity, no excessive concern, just the simple recognition from one former soldier to another. "Officer Morris mentioned you might have a job offer," Robert said, getting to the point. "Though I'm still not clear on what exactly you think I can do for the Boston PD." Harper leaned back in his chair, studying Robert with shrewd eyes. "What do you know about community policing?" "Mr. Mitchell, only what I've seen in my neighborhood. Officers patrolling on foot sometimes. Coffee with a cop, events at the local diner. That sort of thing. That's part of it, yes, but effective community policing is about more than visibility. It's about trust." Harper's expression turned serious. And right now, in many parts of this city, that trust is at an all-time low. Robert remained silent, waiting for the captain to continue. The incident between you and Officer Morris, both at the diner and later during the shooting, has created an opportunity. A mechanic with no obligation to law enforcement putting his life on the line to save an officer who had treated him poorly. It's caught people's attention. Harper spread his hands. We'd like to capitalize on that attention to build better relationships in your neighborhood, particularly with communities that have historically mistrusted police. And you want me to be what, a poster boy? Robert's voice held a note of skepticism. No, Harper replied firmly. We want you to be a bridge, a liaison between the department and the community, particularly in areas where tensions are high. You'd work with our community outreach team, attend neighborhood meetings, provide insights on how our officers could better serve residents. You'd also help train our newer officers on how to approach civilians with respect and understanding. Robert frowned slightly. I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that. Your record suggests otherwise. Harper opened a folder on his desk, Robert's military file, he realized with a start. 12 years of service, multiple commendations for leadership under fire, experience training new recruits, and most importantly, you're respected in your community. People trust you. That's different, Robert objected. That's about fixing engines, not fixing social problems. Harper's eyes crinkled with genuine amusement. Is it so different? In both cases, you're identifying what's broken and finding a way to make it work again. He sobered quickly. Look, Mitchell, I'm not offering you a magic wand. Community relations aren't built or repaired overnight. What I am offering is a chance to be part of the solution. 20 hours a week, decent pay, full benefits, including health insurance for you and your daughter. The mention of health insurance gave Robert pause. His medical bills from the shooting were mostly covered by the city since he'd been injured saving an officer. But Sarah's regular checkups, dental work, and the therapy sessions she'd started after Emily's death, those were becoming harder to manage with the shop closed. I'd still keep my garage, Robert said, not quite a question. Of course, we're not asking you to change careers just to add another dimension to the one you have. Harper leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. The community respects you, Mitchell. They see you as one of their own, a working man who understands their struggles. And after what happened with Officer Morris, they also see you as someone with an uncommon sense of justice. That combination is rare and valuable. Robert was silent for a long moment, weighing the offer. The practical benefits were clear, steady income, while he recovered insurance for Sarah, a chance to rebuild his savings. But there were other considerations, less tangible, but no less important. My daughter comes first, he said finally. I won't take a position that puts her at risk or keeps me away from her more than necessary. Harper nodded. Family first, always. We can work around your schedule, ensure you're home for dinner, school events, the important stuff. And I speak my mind, Robert continued. If I see something in this department that I think is wrong, I won't stay quiet about it. I wouldn't expect you to, Harper replied. In fact, that's partly why we want you. Fresh eyes and outsider's perspective. Someone who'll call us on our blind spots. Robert studied the captain's face, looking for signs of insincerity, but found none. All right, he said at last. I'll give it a try. 3 months. We'll reassess after that. Harper smiled, extending his hand again. Welcome aboard, Mitchell. As they shook on the agreement, the office door opened and Diana Morris entered, a file folder tucked under her arm. She paused when she saw Robert's surprise, registering briefly before her professional mask fell back into place. Sorry, Captain. I didn't realize you were in a meeting. No apology necessary, Officer Morris. In fact, your timing is perfect. Harper gestured to Robert. Mr. Mitchell has just agreed to join us as a community liaison. Given your unique history together, I think you'd be the ideal officer to help him get oriented. Diana's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. Of course, sir. Excellent. I'll have HR prepare the paperwork and be in touch about start dates. Harper stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Welcome to the team, Mitchell. I think you'll find it's not so different from the last team you were part of, just a different uniform. As Robert left the office with Diana, he wasn't entirely sure if that comparison was reassuring or concerning. The Marine Corps had given him purpose, discipline, brotherhood, but it had also exposed him to the darkest aspects of human nature, and left him with scars both visible and hidden. "So," Diana said as they walked down the hallway, "you took the job." "3-month trial," Robert clarified. "We'll see how it goes." Diana stopped at the water cooler, filling 2 paper cups and handing one to Robert. "The captain doesn't usually do the recruiting personally. He must really want you on board." Robert accepted the water, taking a small sip. "Any idea why, besides the obvious PR value?" Diana considered the question. "Harper was a sergeant in the Gulf War. Infantry. He doesn't talk about it much, but rumor has it he saved his entire platoon when they were ambushed outside Basra. I think he recognizes something in you, the same thing I saw when you stepped between me and those gunmen." "And what's that?" "The instinct to protect regardless of cost." Diana met his gaze directly. "It's rare even among cops and soldiers, rarer still in civilians." Robert shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "I should get going. Sarah's waiting at Mrs. Wilson's." Diana nodded, but as Robert turned to leave, she called after him, "Mitchell." He paused, glancing back. "For what it's worth, I think you'll be good at this. Better than you expect." Robert didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and continued toward the exit, his mind already turning to Sarah, to the explanation he'd need to give her about this new chapter in their lives, and to the uncertainty that stretched before them like an uncharted road. The '67 Mustang gleamed under the shop lights, its forest green paint job catching and reflecting the glow like a precious gem. It had taken Robert 2 months of painstaking work to restore the vehicle work that had stretched his healing body to its limits, but had also provided a focus, a purpose during his recovery. Now, as he ran a soft cloth over the hood one final time, he felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done. "She's a beauty," Frank Henderson said from his perch on a nearby stool. At 82, the old man still visited the shop almost daily, offering advice that Robert didn't need but appreciated nonetheless. "Your daddy would have been proud of that restoration." Robert smiled slightly at the mention of his father. "He always said American muscle cars had souls, that you had to listen to them, not just fix them." "Wise man, your father." Frank sipped from the coffee mug that had become a permanent fixture in his gnarled hands. "Speaking of listening, heard anything more about those gangbangers who tried to take out Officer Morris?" Robert's expression sobered. "Nothing specific. The investigation is ongoing." It had been nearly 3 months since the shooting, 2 since Robert had accepted the liaison position with the Boston PD. The work was different than he'd expected. Less about public appearances and more about genuine community building. He'd started by simply listening to residents' complaints about overzealous patrolling, to officers' frustrations about lack of cooperation, to the merchants' concerns about response times. Slowly, he was beginning to see the larger picture, the complex web of misunderstandings and legitimate grievances that had created the current tension. And through it all, Diana Morris had been his unexpected ally. Her initial hostility had evolved into a grudging respect, then a tentative friendship. They made an odd pair, the no-nonsense cop and the taciturn mechanic, but somehow it worked. Their shared experience had forged a connection that transcended their differences. "Mr. Hendricks called," Sarah announced, emerging from the office with her ever-present sketchbook. "He said he'll be here at 4 to pick up his green goddess." She rolled her eyes with the exasperated fondness of a child repeating an adult's silly sentiment. Robert checked his watch. "That gives us about an hour. How's the homework coming?" "All done except for my science project." Sarah climbed onto a stool next to Frank, showing him her latest drawing, a detailed rendering of the Mustang's engine. "I need to build a simple machine that demonstrates mechanical advantage. Dad said we could use stuff from the shop." "Smart thinking," Frank approved. "Nothing teaches physics better than getting your hands dirty." The bell above the shop door jingled, and Diana entered, dressed in her full uniform. Her shift had ended an hour ago, but she often stopped by the garage on her way home, sometimes with case files she wanted Robert's perspective on, sometimes just for coffee and conversation. "Officer Morris," Sarah greeted her with enthusiasm. In the months since the shooting, Diana had become a regular presence in their lives, checking in on Robert's recovery, occasionally bringing dinner when she knew he was working late, even attending Sarah's school science fair as moral support. "Hey, Squirt." Diana smiled, ruffling Sarah's hair. "How's the masterpiece coming along?" "Almost done. Want to see?" Sarah held up her sketchbook proudly. "In a minute. I need to talk to your dad first." Diana's expression was serious enough that Robert straightened, handing the polishing cloth to Frank. Sarah, why don't you and Frank go check on that box of parts in the storage room? See if we can find something for your science project. Sarah looked between the adults, sensing the shift in mood, but nodded. Okay, come on, Mr. Frank. Once they were out of earshot, Diana moved closer, her voice low. We got a lead on the Skull Raven supplier. A big one. The task force is planning a raid tonight. Robert frowned. I thought you were on desk duty for another week. I am. This isn't about me. Diana hesitated, then continued. It's about you. Captain Harper wants you there. Me, why, Di? Because we're raiding a warehouse in your neighborhood, a place where a lot of local kids hang out. Harper's concerned about community blowback, especially if things go sideways. Diana held his gaze steadily. He thinks having you there might help keep the situation calm. Robert's frown deepened. I'm not a cop, Diana. I have no authority in a raid situation. No, but you have influence. People in that neighborhood respect you. If they see you there, they'll be more likely to trust that we're not just swooping in to make random arrests. She placed a hand on his arm. This could be big, Robert. We're talking about the supplier who's been pushing synthetic opioids into schools, including Sarah's. The same people who tried to kill me kill us because I was getting too close. Robert was silent for a long moment, weighing his responsibilities. The liaison role had been relatively low risk so far, meetings, community events, the occasional ride-along with patrol officers. A raid was different, dangerous, potentially volatile. What time, he asked finally. Briefing's at 8. We move at 10. Diana's relief was visible. Thank you. Robert nodded, already calculating. Mrs. Wilson could watch Sarah. She'd done it before on the evenings when his liaison work kept him out later than usual. I'm not carrying, he said firmly, and I stay back out of the action. I'm there as an observer only. Absolutely, Diana agreed quickly. Captain's orders, in fact. You'll wear a vest, stay with the command vehicle, only approach when the scene is secure. Frank and Sarah returned from the storage room, Sarah clutching a collection of gears and pulleys with triumphant excitement. Look what we found, Dad. Mr. Frank says we can make a block and tackle system to demonstrate mechanical advantage. Robert forced a smile, pushing aside his concerns about the night ahead. That's perfect, sweetheart. Why don't you set it up on your workbench and we'll take a look after Mr. Hendricks picks up his car. As Sarah bounded off to her corner of the shop, a small area Robert had set up specifically for her projects, Diana caught his eye. The silent communication between them had become familiar over the past months. Be careful. You too. Watch your back. I should go, Diana said aloud. Paperwork to finish before tonight. I'll see you at the briefing, Robert confirmed. After Diana had left, Frank shuffled over his expression, knowing. Police business. Robert nodded, not bothering to dissemble. Frank had been around long enough to read between the lines. Dangerous, sir? Could be. The old man sighed, his weathered face creasing with concern. You're not a cop, Rob. You've got responsibilities here. His eyes drifted meaningfully towards Sarah, who was sorting through her collection of parts with focused determination. I know, Robert said quietly, but I also have responsibilities to the community, to the kids who might be saved if we can shut down this drug pipeline. He paused, then added, to Diana. Frank studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your father was the same way, could never stand by when he thought he could help, even when it cost him. He clapped Robert on the shoulder. Just make sure helping others doesn't cost that little girl her father. She's already lost too much. The words settled like a weight on Robert's chest, a reminder of the delicate balance he walked every day between duty and family, between the man he'd been trained to be and the father Sarah needed him to be. As the afternoon light slanted through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the gleaming Mustang, Robert found himself wondering if he was making the right choice. If the path he'd chosen, or perhaps the path that had chosen him, would lead to redemption or regret. Only time would tell. And time, as Robert knew all too well, was the one commodity none of them could afford to waste. The Tactical Operations Center was housed in a nondescript van parked 3 blocks from the target warehouse. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the blue glow of computer monitors. Robert sat quietly in the corner, the Kevlar vest uncomfortably tight across his healing wounds, listening as Captain Harper outlined the final details of the operation. Intelligence suggests minimal resistance, Harper explained, pointing to a schematic of the warehouse. Primary target is Devin Reeves' suspected supplier for the Skull Ravens and 3 other distribution networks across the Northeast. Secondary targets include approximately 15 to 20 gang members and an unconfirmed amount of product, likely synthetic opioids and methamphetamine. Robert's gaze drifted to Diana, who sat ramrod straight in her chair, absorbing every detail. Though still technically on desk duty, she'd been allowed to participate in the raid as a consultant due to her extensive knowledge of the case. Like Robert, she would remain in the command vehicle, away from the direct action. Mitchell, Harper's voice pulled Robert's attention back. You're here for one reason only, community liaison. If this goes sideways and we have civilians gathering, you help keep them calm, explain what's happening. You do not engage with suspects. You do not enter the building until it's cleared. Clear. Crystal, sir, Robert replied, the familiar military response coming automatically. Harper nodded, satisfied. Alpha team takes the front. Bravo circles around back. We move in precisely at 2200 hours. Any questions? The assembled officers, 12 in total, wearing tactical gear and grim expressions, remain silent. All right, check your comms, check your weapons. We move in 20 minutes. As the team dispersed to make final preparations, Diana sidled up to Robert, her voice low. Having second thoughts. Robert considered the question honestly. No, but I am wondering what Sarah would think if she knew where I was tonight. Diana's expression softened slightly. She'd be proud, scared but proud. Maybe. Robert wasn't so sure. At 8, Sarah's understanding of the world was still forming, shaped by loss and resilience in equal measure. She knew her father now worked with the police sometimes, but in her mind, that meant talking to people, attending community meetings, not participating in raids against dangerous drug suppliers. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Robert had forgotten this part of operations, the waiting, the coiled tension before action, the way time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. His body remembered, though. His heart rate had slowed, his breathing evened out, his senses sharpened. The body preparing for possible combat, even as his mind insisted he was only an observer. 2 minutes, Harper announced, checking his watch. Comms check. Each team leader reported in voices crisp and professional in the enclosed space of the van. Robert watched the synchronized dance of preparation with a familiar detachment, the part of him that had been shaped by war, recognizing and respecting the discipline on display. Mitchell Morris, you stay here with Tech Specialist Jensen, Harper instructed, nodding toward the young officer monitoring the surveillance feeds. You're our eyes and ears. Any civilians approach any unexpected movement outside the target zone, you alert us immediately. Yes, sir, Diana acknowledged, settling into a chair beside Jensen. As the tactical teams filed out of the van, moving with practiced stealth toward their positions, Robert felt the strange displacement of being on this side of an operation. For 12 years, he'd been the one moving toward danger, weapon ready, adrenaline pumping. Now he sat in relative safety, watching others take the risks. 1 minute, Jensen announced, eyes fixed on his screen. Diana's hand found Robert's arm, a brief touch conveying shared tension. He glanced at her, noting the tightness around her eyes, the slight clench of her jaw. This was personal for her. These were the same people who had tried to kill her, who had put Robert in the hospital. The same people whose drugs were finding their way into neighborhoods like theirs, into schools where children like Sarah learned and played. 30 seconds. Robert's thoughts turned to his daughter, safely asleep at Mrs. Wilson's apartment. He'd told her he had a late meeting with the police department, not a lie, but not the complete truth either. He'd promised to pick her up in the morning to make pancakes with blueberries shaped into smiley faces to help her finish her science project. Promises he intended to keep. Teams in position, go, go, go. The command crackled through the radio, and on the monitors they watched as shadowy figures converged on the warehouse. Even through the grainy night vision feed, Robert could appreciate the precision of the operation teams moving in perfect synchronization, covering angles, securing entrances. Boston Police, search warrant. The shout was audible both through the radio and faintly through the van's walls. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, a nightmare sequence that Robert recognized from his darkest combat memories. A flash of light from inside the warehouse, bright enough to register even on the night vision cameras. Then a sound that Robert felt in his bones before his ears registered it, the deep concussive boom of an explosion. IED, someone shouted over the radio. Man down, man down. The feed from the front entrance camera went dark. Jensen frantically switched to alternate views revealing chaos officers taking cover, smoke billowing from the warehouse doors, the unmistakable flashes of gunfire. This is Harper. Status report all teams. The responses came in fragments overlapping in their urgency. Officer down at the front entrance. Taking fire from the second floor. Multiple suspects fleeing through the east exit. Robert was on his feet before he made a conscious decision to move. Diana rose with him, her expression a mirror of his own grim determination. We need to help, she said, reaching for the spare tactical vest hanging by the door. Jensen looked between them, panicked. Captain said you're to remain here. Circumstances have changed. Robert cut him off, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a combat veteran. Officer down means all hands. Stay on comms, keep us updated on movement. He turned to Diana. You're still recovering. You stay back, provide support. I'll go for the injured officer. Like hell, Diana shot back, already checking the sidearm she wasn't supposed to be carrying. We go together or not at all. There was no time to argue. Through the van's windows, Robert could see civilians beginning to emerge from nearby buildings, drawn by the explosion and gunfire. Soon the scene would be chaotic, not just with the raid gone wrong, but with curious onlookers potentially in the line of fire. Jensen, alert backup units, then get on crowd control, Robert ordered. Keep civilians at least 2 blocks back. Let's move. They exited the van at a crouch, keeping to shadows as they approached the warehouse. The smell of cordite and burning chemicals hung in the air, acrid and familiar to Robert in the worst possible way. Gunfire continued to pop sporadically from inside the building, punctuated by shouted commands and the wail of approaching sirens. East side, Diana murmured, gesturing toward a service entrance where the schematic had shown a loading dock. Less exposure might give us access to the downed officer. Robert nodded, impressed despite the circumstances by her tactical thinking. They moved in tandem, covering each other as they crossed the open space between buildings. Robert's body protested 3 months wasn't enough time to fully heal from gunshot wounds, but adrenaline pushed the pain to the background, a dull throb beneath the sharp focus of the mission. They reached the loading dock without incident, pressing themselves against the concrete wall beside the partially open door. Inside, they could hear movement voices, some shouting orders in the clipped tones of law enforcement, others cursing in panic. Ready? Robert asked, meeting Diana's eyes. She nodded, once her expression resolute. They entered in perfect coordination, sweeping corners, identifying threats with the silent communication of those who understand that words waste precious seconds. The loading area was relatively clear, crates stacked along walls, a forklift parked haphazardly, as if abandoned mid-task, but no immediate danger. The same couldn't be said for the main floor. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, the scene that greeted them was one of controlled chaos. Officers had established a defensive perimeter around their fallen comrade, trading fire with suspects who had taken positions on a metal catwalk that ringed the upper level of the warehouse. Robert spotted Captain Harper crouched behind a concrete pillar, coordinating the response with grim efficiency. The captain's face registered momentary surprise when he saw Robert and Diana, but he had no time to question their presence. "Officer Davis is down," Harper called to them, gesturing toward a figure lying prone behind a makeshift barricade of wooden pallets. Caught the edge of the blast. Medics can't get through with the ongoing gunfire. Robert assessed the situation with the cold calculation of experience. The downed officer was maybe 30 feet away in a relatively exposed position. The suppressing fire from the tactical team was keeping the suspects pinned down, but any movement toward Davis would draw attention. "I need a distraction," Robert said, his mind already mapping the shortest path to the injured officer. Harper nodded grimly. "On my mark, we'll concentrate fire on the northeast corner. That should give you about 10 seconds of clear movement." "That's all I need," Robert turned to Diana. "Stay with the captain. Provide covering fire." For once, she didn't argue. "Be careful," was all she said, her eyes conveying what words couldn't. Robert positioned himself at the edge of cover muscles, tensed, ready to move. Harper raised 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. Covering fire now. The cacophony of gunfire was deafening as the tactical team unleashed a barrage toward the catwalk. Robert exploded into motion, crossing the open space in a low sprint that sent pain lancing through his side, but got him to Davis in seconds. The young officer was conscious but dazed, blood seeping from a gash across his forehead and his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. "I've got you," Robert assured him, quickly assessing the injuries. "Can you move?" Davis nodded weakly. "Think so. Arm's broken. Maybe concussion. We're going to get you out of here." Robert positioned himself to support Davis's weight. "On three, we move back to the captain's position. Ready, 1, 2, 3. They made it halfway before a new eruption of gunfire forced them to take cover behind another pillar. Robert's combat instincts kicked in fully. He positioned his body between Davis and the incoming fire, scanning for the next safe movement. That's when he saw it, a figure moving stealthily along the catwalk, positioning for a clear shot at the officers below. And in that figure's direct line of sight, Diana, who was focused on providing cover fire in another direction. There was no time to shout a warning. Robert made a split-second decision, one born of training, and something deeper, more primal. He shifted Davis into a secure position against the pillar, then broke cover, moving not toward safety, but toward a stack of crates that would give him a better angle. "Mitchell," Harper's voice cut through the chaos, but Robert was already in motion. He scaled the crates with practiced efficiency, ignoring the screaming protest from his healing wounds. At the top, he had a clear view of the catwalk and the gunman taking aim. Without hesitation, Robert launched himself across the gap, a flying tackle that caught the shooter completely by surprise. They crashed onto the metal grating, the gunman's weapon skittering away. Robert recognized him instantly from the case files Diana had shown him. Devin Reeves, the supplier they'd come to apprehend. The man who had ordered the hit on Diana 3 months ago. Reeves recovered quickly, driving an elbow into Robert's injured side with uncanny accuracy. Pain exploded through Robert's body, momentarily blinding in its intensity. Reeves used the advantage to scramble for his weapon, fingers was closing around the grip. What happened next was pure instinct. Robert swept his leg in a low arc, knocking Reeves off balance. As the supplier staggered, Robert surged upward, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection. They grappled at the edge of the catwalk, locked in a desperate struggle for control. Below, the tactical team had noticed the confrontation. "Hold fire," Harper ordered. "Mitchell's engaged with the primary target." Reeves was strong, fueled by desperation and whatever substances coursed through his system. But Robert had something stronger, the iron discipline forged in combat zones, the unyielding will of a man who had promised his daughter he'd return home. With a final surge of effort, Robert pinned Reeves against the catwalk railing. "It's over," he growled. "Not yet." Reeves spat, and Robert felt something cold press against his ribs, a secondary weapon, small but lethal at this range. Time slowed to a crawl. Robert was acutely aware of Diana below, her face upturned in horror as she realized what was happening. Of Harper shouting something into his radio. Of the weight of his promise to Sarah suddenly hanging by the thinnest of threads. But before Reeves could pull the trigger, a single shot rang out. The supplier's eyes widened in shock, then dulled as he slumped forward. Robert caught him instinctively, lowering him to the catwalk grating as blood bloomed across Reeves's chest. Diana stood below her service weapon, still raised her aim, true even at that distance. Their eyes met across the space, a moment of connection amid the chaos, acknowledgement of a debt repaid, a life for a life. The firefight ended quickly after that. Without their leader, the remaining gang members surrendered or fled, only to be apprehended by the perimeter teams. Medics swarmed the warehouse, attending to Davis and the other injured officers. None of the wounds were fatal, a small miracle given the scale of the ambush. Robert descended from the catwalk slowly, each step sending fresh waves of pain through his battered body. By the time he reached the ground floor, the adrenaline was fading, leaving him lightheaded and unsteady. Diana was at his side, instantly supporting his weight. "You stupid, reckless," her voice caught. "You could have been killed." "You would have done the same," Robert replied simply. Harper approached his expression an unreadable mixture of anger and respect. "That was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever witnessed, Mitchell. And I've seen my share of both." "Sorry, sir. Couldn't let them get another shot at Officer Morris." The captain's stern facade cracked slightly. "Well, your community liaison days might be over, but I'd say you've earned your place with this department. Whatever role we eventually figure out for you." He clapped Robert gently on his uninjured shoulder. "Get yourself checked out by the medics. That's an order." As Harper moved away to coordinate the scene cleanup, Diana kept her arm around Robert's waist, steadying him. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. "Why risk everything for me, again?" Robert thought about Sarah, about the promise of pancakes with blueberry smiles, about Emily, whose memory still guided his moral compass, about the community that had embraced him and his daughter after tragedy had struck. "Because some things are worth protecting," he said finally. "Some debts can never be repaid, it only pass forward." Diana's eyes glistened in the harsh emergency lights. "Your daughter needs you alive, Robert." "She needs me whole," he corrected gently. "And that means being the kind of man who doesn't walk away when others are in danger." He managed a small smile. "Besides, you had my back, just like I knew you would." The wail of additional sirens pierced the night as backup units and ambulances converged on the scene. Soon the warehouse would be crawling with evidence, technicians, narcotics officers, and the inevitable brass that appeared whenever an operation of this magnitude unfolded. The media wouldn't be far behind, hungry for details about the drug bust that had turned into a firefight in a residential neighborhood. But for now, in this brief pocket of aftermath, Robert and Diana stood together in a moment of shared understanding. Two people who had seen the worst in each other and the best who had saved each other in ways that transcended the physical. "Let's get you to the medics," Diana said, gently guiding him toward the exit. "I promised Sarah I'd bring you home safe, and I don't intend to break that promise." Robert raised an eyebrow. "When did you promise Sarah that?" "The day you were released from the hospital. She made me pinky swear to always look out for her dad." Diana's smile was small but genuine. "Said you needed someone watching your back since her mom couldn't do it anymore." The simple truth of a child's wisdom struck Robert deeply. Perhaps that's what he and Diana had been doing all along, filling the gaps left by those they'd lost, becoming for each other the protection their loved ones could no longer provide. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, flashing police lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue, Robert found himself thinking not of the violence they'd just survived, but of tomorrow morning, of pancakes with blueberry smiles, of Sarah's science project, of the small, ordinary moments that gave life its meaning. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he would keep his promise. He would go home to his daughter. He would continue to rebuild their life one day at a time. And perhaps along the way, he would help rebuild something larger. A community's trust, a city's sense of safety, a police officer's faith in humanity. Not because he was a hero, as the media would undoubtedly label him in the coming days, but because he was a father, a neighbor, a friend. Because he understood, as few ever truly do, that strength isn't measured by how hard you can hit, but by what you choose to protect. 6 months later, on a crisp spring morning, Robert stood at the back of a crowded auditorium, watching as Sarah carefully adjusted the block and tackle system they had built together. The science fair buzzed with energy, proud parents, excited children, teachers moving from exhibit to exhibit with clipboards and encouraging smiles. "She's going to win," Diana predicted, standing beside him in civilian clothes, her police uniform exchanged for jeans and a casual blazer. "That mechanism is college-level engineering." Robert smiled, pride warming his chest. "She did most of it herself. I just helped with the heavy lifting." In the months since the warehouse raid, life had settled into a new rhythm. Robert's shop was thriving again, busier than ever, thanks to the publicity that had followed his actions that night. The community liaison position had evolved into something more permanent, a role that combined community outreach with tactical training for new officers, teaching them to see the neighborhoods they patrolled as communities of individuals rather than potential crime scenes. Diana had been promoted to detective, her work on the Skull Ravens case earning her the recognition she'd long deserved. She spent more time at Robert and Sarah's house than her own apartment these days, becoming a fixture at dinner tables, weekend outings, and school events. The warehouse raid had yielded more than just arrests. The evidence recovered had led to the dismantling of 3 major drug distribution networks across the Northeast, the arrest of corrupt officials who had facilitated the operations, and the seizure of synthetic opioids worth millions. Most importantly to Robert, it had removed a significant threat from the schools and streets where children like Sarah lived and learned. "Dad, Officer Diana." Sarah waved excitedly from her exhibit as the judges approached. "They're coming to see my project." Robert gave her a thumbs up, his heart swelling at her enthusiasm. Beside him, Diana slipped her hand into his, a gesture that had become natural over the past months, a connection neither of them had sought, but both had come to cherish. She called me Officer Diana again, Diana murmured, amusement coloring her voice. I've told her a dozen times that Detective Morris is my official title now. Old habits, Robert replied with a smile. Besides, you'll always be Officer Diana to her. That's how she first knew you. As the mean cop who yelled at her dad in a diner, not my finest moment. No, Robert agreed. But what matters isn't how we start. It's how we continue, how we learn from our mistakes and grow beyond them. Diana leaned slightly against his shoulder, a casual intimacy that still surprised him sometimes. When did you get so philosophical, Mitchell? Must be all those books Sarah's been reading to me. She's on The Little Prince now, lots of deep thoughts about what's essential being invisible to the eyes. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at Sarah's exhibit. The judges were clearly impressed, asking questions that Sarah answered with confidence beyond her years. One of them, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, was examining the mechanical system with particular interest. That's Dr. Henderson from MIT, Diana whispered. He's on the board of the Science Foundation that sponsors these fairs. Getting his attention is a big deal. Robert watched as his daughter explained the principles of mechanical advantage with the same focused intensity Emily had shown when discussing her research. The resemblance was striking, the same animated hand gestures, the same crinkle at the corner of her eyes when she smiled. She's so much like her mother, he said softly. Diana squeezed his hand gently. She has a lot of you in her too. The determination, the way she tackles problems head on. The stubbornness, Robert suggested with a wry smile. Definitely the stubbornness, Diana agreed, but also the compassion, the instinct to help others. She paused, then added, the courage. The judges moved on to the next exhibit, and Sarah bounced on her toes with barely contained excitement. She gave her father and Diana a double thumbs up, her smile radiant even from across the room. Whatever happens with the judging, I think we should celebrate, Diana suggested. Maybe pizza at Antonio's. I heard they just added a new arcade section. Sarah would love that, Robert agreed. Though I'm not sure my shoulder is up for skee-ball yet. Diana raised an eyebrow. Your shoulder seemed fine last weekend when you were replacing the transmission in Mrs. Peterson's Buick. That's different. That's work. Uh-huh. Diana's skepticism was playful. Well, you can watch Sarah and me dominate the high score board then. As they bantered, Robert was struck by the easy comfort of their relationship, the way they had moved from adversaries to allies, to something deeper, something neither of them had expected, but both now treasured. It wasn't without complications. They both carried wounds visible and hidden. They both had responsibilities that sometimes pulled them in different directions. But they had found in each other a rare understanding, a shared commitment to protecting what mattered most. Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts as she ran toward them, weaving through the crowd with boundless energy. Dad, Detective Diana, Dr. Henderson, said my project was the most impressive mechanical demonstration he's seen from an elementary student in years. He wants me to enter the state competition. Robert crouched down to her level, ignoring the twinge in his side that still flared occasionally. That's amazing, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Sarah threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him off balance with her enthusiasm. He said I could be an engineer someday, just like you always told me. He's right, Robert agreed, holding her close. You can be anything you set your mind to. Even a police detective like Diana, Sarah asked, glancing up at the woman who had become such an important part of their lives. Diana smiled, crouching down beside them. Absolutely, though I think you'd make an even better one than me. Sarah considered this seriously. Maybe I'll be both, an engineer who solves crimes with science. She brightened at the idea. Like on those TV shows you never let me watch because they're too grown up. Robert laughed, rising to his feet and lifting Sarah with him despite his body's protests. Some burdens were worth the strain. One career at a time, kiddo. For now, let's focus on getting through third grade and the state science competition. As they left the auditorium, Sarah chattering excitedly between them, Robert caught Diana's eye over his daughter's head. The understanding that passed between them needed no words, a shared acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them here, of the challenges overcome, and those still to face of the unexpected family they had formed from the fragments of their broken pasts. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the world in golden light. The neighborhood stretched before them, the same streets where Robert had nearly died protecting Diana, the same community they both now worked to serve in their different ways. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was theirs, and they would guard it fiercely, not just as officer and civilian, but as people who had learned the true meaning of protection, standing between harm and those you love, whatever the cost. Sarah tugged at both their hands, impatient to celebrate her triumph. Come on, pizza's waiting. And so they went together, the mechanic, the detective, and the little girl who had brought them together. Three people walking into a future none of them could have imagined 6 months ago, but one they now faced was something that felt remarkably like hope. Not because the road ahead would be easy, but because they had found in each other the strength to face whatever came their way, one step, one day, one challenge at a time, together. There are moments that define us, crossroads, where instinct overrides reason, where the path we choose reveals not who we are, but who we've always been. For Robert Mitchell, that moment came when he stepped between danger and a woman who had shown him nothing but contempt. Not for glory or gratitude, but because his daughter was watching even when she wasn't there to see. Some scars never fully heal. The bullets that tore through Robert's flesh left their marks just as grief had etched itself into his heart years before. Yet from these wounds grew something unexpected. A bridge between broken people, a foundation for a future neither could have imagined alone. Diana Morris learned that the uniform she wore was less important than the humanity beneath it. Sarah discovered that family isn't always bound by blood, but by those who choose to stay when they could walk away. And Robert, he found that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in standing alone, but in allowing others to stand beside you. Perhaps that's the truest measure of courage, not in the bullets we take or the battles we fight, but in the hearts we open after they've been shattered. What would you risk to protect someone who once hurt you?